Acts and facts and their unnoticed relationship, dance routine, and in particular their camouflage agreement. I was going to ask you to take note of something that you've all heard, but again we have live writing our material. Note how ordinary people, just of all stripes, highly esteem an athlete, a red circuit sort of guy, an athlete insisting on his intention to better his own achievements. In print, and nowadays quite often in the electronic media, that takes up a large part of sports interviews. Anything you turn on, and I'm just picking out sports is the quite easiest and the focal point of such things, but now think about it, a red circuit sort of guy, take an athlete. A large part will be him talking about how he's striving to beat his own personal records, his own past achievements. There is no operational, no noticeable parallel in the fact world of man, in the intellectual domain. Contrary, if we took authors, painters, scientists, composers that have some repute, they remain famous forever on the basis of their past writings, paintings, ideas, and their last hit. Now, there's no doubt, I don't want you to miss the subtleness, there's no doubt that they can be interviewing, let us say. And by interview, all of you, I assume you understand, but now, this kind of, the same process is behind two people out in this world, and one interviewing the other, is no more than a cruder reflection for a revolutionist than the kind of internal dialogue that is going on anyway, inside of a non-focused intellect. There's no doubt that they can be out there interviewing an author and he will say, I'm working on a new book. But that will take up almost nothing. Or they can ask a composer, whether it be popular music, classical, they can ask him, or what are you up to? And he may say something as well. I've been commissioned by the Mexican government to do a new mural. It will be almost nothing, though, because the whole gist of him being famous forever, that is, assuming he's going to stay famous at least in his lifetime. You do know, you just never thought about it, they can drag out musicians, composers, painters that at one time were famous. 30 years ago, 10 years ago, they were famous for what they do. If they're still famous, their fame remains based upon their past actions. And whatever they talk about insofar as their contemporary efforts, their plans for the future, if we were saying that they're going to have a 10-minute interview, just to give you a figure, it's going to be 30 seconds of any sort of apparent electrical, intellectual, that is, verbal investigation, retelling, interest in what would seem to be upcoming achievements, efforts. It is all based that they are famous, no one analyzes it. They are famous on the basis of what they've already done, and no one, I repeat, analyzes it this way because it's not important, but they are not famous on the basis anymore that they may do better, that they may paint a painting that's more famous than Madame X when it came out, when the man presented at the Museum of Modern Art in 1949 and shook the New York art scene to its foundations. That's what the man's famous for. Or a symphony he wrote. One of the first men in the Western world to drag in the dissonant harmonies so inherent in bebop of the 40s into classical music. 50 years ago, and that's what he is still famous for. He may be writing, they may perform some of his stuff. The man who wrote the book that set afire the political aspirations of a whole generation in 1952. The near vademecum of freshmen in college. Now, he may have written since then, but that is still what he is famous for. And it's not just the arts. I went ahead and threw in a scientist. A scientist may do something new, but do you understand? Everybody that's famous, I tried to give you a whole range of authors, artists, scientists, composers. They are all famous on the basis of something they did. Now, an athlete can be famous. The man who ran the first 3-minute mile. He can be famous. And he may not have done anything since then, and if he does get invited somewhere, if they do get him down to a local station down in Panama City to, and they give him $50 to do a endorsement for a used car lot, they'll say, or they'll at least flash the graphic, the first man to run a 3-minute mile. They don't point out that it was 1927. Of course, it was 1957 or whatever it was. But that is almost no fame at all. If he is going to be famous at all, up to the level that a man who had a painting that was controversial enough to make him grab the headlines 20 years ago, if a red circuit sort of guy had any parallel to that kind of fame, he may not have done anything great since then, but he has got to talk about, he has got to be factually talking about, it's been a hard climb, and probably he'd be a little quick digression into drugs, alcohol, broken marriages. And so that's why you didn't hear of me for the last 30 years. So, is anything else new before we leave you and go into something important like the farm report? And he says, yes, now that I've cleaned up, I have been sober now for almost, 6 hours. I want you to know that I'm out running. I have started an excruciating. This morning I ran almost 50 yards. And I'm going to be increasing it every day. That will get, now of course I was being sort of funny, but that will get their attention on the basis of red circuit. That is more, relatively speaking, more act-based activities and people. The esteem, the attraction of ordinary people toward them, relatively speaking, which is in the city, speaking just as good as you can speak, is not on the basis of what they did. They'll say, here is the guy who ran the 3-minute mile. Here's the team who won the Super Bowl last year and the quarterback of the winning team of the Super Bowl last year who had the greatest, biggest lopsided victory. You go, oh yeah, I always wanted to see him, but it's over. Because then the attitude is, well, what are you up to now, bastard? Because he has got to say, well, and if it doesn't seem to be that specific, it may be an institutional apparent effort like, well, I am now striving to even be a greater leader for my team. I'm trying to, get into a better space with the other guys. It has to be, to get the attraction, a certain kind of what appears to be actual heroic esteem from other people. It has to be. It always is, if you notice, on the basis that even this guy, as great as he was at one time, it's not enough for me. Sure, I was heavyweight champ 5 times. All I got to do is drop 300 pounds, and hell, I'm going to get back there, I'm going to regain it for the 6th time. And you could go, who's he fooling? But at least he will make the news, that is, those involved around the scenario of red circuit, act-based activities will find some attraction as long as somebody is trying to outdo themselves. When it gets, relatively speaking, further up the nervous system into what would seem to be the world of arts and sciences and letters, there is no distinct parallel. Because you can be famous one time, a scientist may be still working on something, and every now and then he may get some little blurb, but if he was the guy who first discovered the second cousin of DNA, that's his fame. And he will not remain famous on the basis of them saying, yeah, we know that, but what are you trying to do now? How are you going to top that? That is not the basis of esteem, attraction, fame, which is a form of energy, when you get into the higher area of the nervous system, specifically into the intellect. Very specifically, I was going to ask, No, you wouldn't. You watch me. I was going to ask, could you begin to suspect that there is a similar arrangement in your own individual neural world? I might add, for life's convenience. You never noticed. You're not a 7-Eleven store. I don't know why we call them convenience stores. Convenient for whom? Convenient to what kind of low-life mothers? If you're really on the ball, if you're a good human, you might be awake, or you should be 24 hours a day. So how can they say a 7-Eleven store is a convenience store? That's only for ordinary people that might go to sleep during the hours of 11 p.m. You understand? So you're not a convenience store to life. Now, I know most of you sleep. Some of you take cat naps, but I got news for you. You're open 24 hours a day for life's convenience. Just try shutting down. Just try it. If you manage to shut down, by the way, it's getting off the subject, but so what? If you did manage to shut down, I should warn you. I shouldn't be cavalier about this. If you did manage to shut down, you'll never get open back up. So, can you see that there is an arrangement in the neural world that all I just got through talking about for these low minutes was not about athletes and scientists and people out there. There is an arrangement, the way in which the neural systems within man does a kind of piggyback, pulling oneself up by one's own jockstrap, bootstrap. See, I knew you'd say that, but that's not as bad as the woman that Freud met who couldn't eat in public because she could never ask for an fork. Because it turns out Freud had an assistant, not many people know about it, that he had the solution. Freud, or who it was, just wrote it up like, well, there's a classic case, the woman, and of course it lent itself immediately because you know what the word was. She said that she was afraid. It never happened, but she just knew that she was in public at a nice affair, dining with the Queen or somewhere, and she said, would you pass me? She just knew that if she ever said the word F-O-R-K, she said it was going to come out F-U-C-K. I think back then in the books, in the original, the English, that she was afraid it was going to say F blank blank blank, and you had to figure it out. Well, at any rate, really off the subject, it turns out he's not given credit anymore. Well, he never was. But Freud had an assistant. He actually cleaned the office, but it turns out the man was not a dummy. He suggested to the woman, after office hours, that she simply said, would you pass me the spoon? And then somebody reached for a spoon, and she'd say, no, the other spoon. And then maybe they reached for a knife, and they said, no, the other spoon, until they got to the F-O-R-K. And she'd say, yeah, that spoon. But that shows you the kind of internal politics. It makes a Freud famous, that he laughs at the woman and says, how about that somebody that's so sexually skewed and repressed that she cannot even ask for a fork, and therefore she has no social life. She can't go out and eat because she's afraid she's going to say, would you pass me the fork? And all you had to do was, would you pass me the spoon? No, the other. No? Yeah, that spoon. Well, I'd like to give the man credit, and regardless of what somebody wrote in and accused me of, that fellow was no relationship to me. So. Back to my inquiry into whether you could see any sort of arrangement that life already has conveniently constructed. It's almost, to use a little bit more of that kind of picturization, as far as the human intellect, the way that an ordinary person's intellectual progression works. You could say it's almost as though everyone intellectually is given one chance, or even has one time. It doesn't matter, it's according to how the person perceived it to have been. But it's like everybody had either one time to do it, or even one time they did do it. Let's say that intellectually they ran the 3-minute mile. But nowadays, of course, that wasn't a big deal. The 2-minute mile. But it's like they did it intellectually one time, and then, relatively speaking, was, boom, oblivion. Now, you can stay famous if we're back out here. They can bring him out, Roddy Frizzell. He hadn't had I admit he is not a well-known country artist, but trust me, he hasn't had a hit since 1949. But he's still working. The man has not sold a painting, or hasn't been featured in any major gallery in 20 years, and he's still famous. All right, now, right quick, leave all that and go in here. It's as though everyone had either the chance or that they thought they, in fact, experienced some kind of major breakthrough, insight, or at one time, by God, I realized something. One time it struck me. You don't have to be a philosopher, and many people, I'm very aware, would not even be able to enunciate this. But everybody either felt as though they did, and this probably applies to most people that be interested in this at all, that at one time you thought along the way somewhere that, by God, I just about got it. And I don't mean necessarily recently. It could have been in your teenage years. It could have been when you were taking L.A. turnarounds and drinking 14 quarts of coffee a night and staying up and discussing philosophy and this and that. And at one time, after being up 4 days, and your urine the color of Colombian coffee beans, that you walked out and you stared up the sky and suddenly you thought, the whole thing, all of life, is like a cake that's not yet done. And that maybe you fell down under a tree and you thought, that's it. That's it. Of course, the way those things go, no offense to your teenage years, but the way those things go, it was a flash that was your 2-minute mile, except you had to lay down. It was so brilliant that you had to lay down, and so you slept. I mean, well, you felt like Buddha or somebody, like, boy, that's the kind of thing, you got the rest. So you slept, 50 hours, and you woke up, and you can't quite remember exactly what the 2-minute mile was. Almost, it was something about life being like a cake. But something's missing. I know it doesn't quite have the feel it did when you ran the 2-minute mile there in person, and the stadium went wild. And all the networks, all the cable sports networks, everybody's there trying to interview you. Sometime later, 50 hours later, 5 years later, yeah, I know I did that, but I don't know, it's just life. It's not quite the same anymore. Now, that seems clear enough if we're now jumping parallels and parables, that the athlete that is not quite the same, to say the least, that later, the thrill of victory, the excitement there at the moment when I did run the 2-minute mile, I cannot recreate it. There are people, I can walk in a room and people go, it's him! And people run up and say, can I have your autograph? And God almighty, how you doing? What's up now? What's new? And of course, with an athlete, if nothing's new, they go, oh, great. Well, I got to go. There's a friend of mine. But it's like, oh, I'm glad to see you. And so there's a certain amount of fame. That is a certain amount of electric attraction. But then it's gone. Intellectually, now, we're back to intellectually. It is as though everyone either ran a 2-minute mile or they had the opportunity. And assuming that anyone hearing this is not particularly famous for your intellectual mile, let's just assume that. You're just average, unusual people. That's what I meant by you did it once and then it's like, boom, instant oblivion. In your case, Warhol overstated it. You were famous for 15 seconds and only to yourself. God, what an insight. Oh, holy Jesus. That's it. Life is like a donut that somebody's tried to fold. Oh, God. If there's just somebody I could call, it's my friends in town. Is everybody else asleep? And you call them, and they passed out. And so you're stuck with it, but you think, well, this kind of thing, now that I see it, it's just as clear. Maybe I'll write about it. Well, maybe I'll take a nap so my head's clearer. And, of course, you take a nap, and that's the end of your fame. And it's not just a nap, and it's not coffee, and it's not drugs. I was using, as always, well, not always. Sometimes you don't do it on Tuesday. Well, we don't normally meet on Tuesday. Huh? I thought maybe I'd shut him up. As always, it is not a matter that something went wrong, but it is a matter that gets very vague that I wasn't going, or more non-focused verbally, that I wasn't going into in much more detail, that the intellect seems to build in a way that is going to reach some point in everyone's ordinary life, that you did become famous. Not out there, we're talking about now, all of this, we're building the scenario in you, in one nervous system. It's like you reach the high point of your life, and they may not, even figuratively speaking, in here, they may not have run out the bands and the reporters, but you in some place, you reach the zenith of your intellectual achievement, whether you realize it or not. You understand? That's why I said everybody either runs their own intellectual 2-minute mile, or they had the opportunity. If you're alive, you had the opportunity. Don't tell me. But you reach that zenith, and that's it. And even internally, is now when I want to refer you back to the sportscaster and the red circuit sort of guy. You cannot even to yourself come up with that kind of esteem, that kind of interest in yourself that you could if you were now inside this kind of discussion inside of you. And you're saying, Jesus, I was a football star when I was in high school. Now look at me. 75 pounds overweight, and I'm smoking, and I drink too much. But on that basis, the red circuit sort of guy inside can go, yeah, I've had it. That's enough. Jesus, my life's not over. Monday. Well, I've already started drinking now. This weekend started, and some of the guys are coming. But Monday, and so it's the interview that now the red circuit aspect, the energy transfer on that basis, is already saying, all right, I will best my own achievements. Now, we're still talking about the privacy in you. That is not sarcasm. It's not cynicism, because you've been through it. That will make people make it through the weekend. That will make people make it through life. Because, of course, from one view, you can make it sound cynical and say, well, you know, people say that. You know, people start spitting up blood, and they'll say, boy, I'm going to quit smoking. People get arrested for the 14th time for drunk driving. They say, boy, I'm going to quit. You can say all that. Or people say, oh, I can't breathe. I got to lose weight. Well, my wife's already fixed supper, though. Look at that. You know, it'll break your heart. Starting tomorrow, I'm going on a diet. That's not a cheap laugh. That is the same kind of thing that I started this. That is the interview that they can go up. There are boxers around. You should know right now that here it is, 291. I can think of one right now, that there is a boxer, and he looks almost like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Although I wouldn't be the one to tell him if I were you. But here he is. The man is 60 pounds over the top weight, I think, of the heaviest heavyweight that's ever won the title. And he's like 10 years over the hill. But he makes the news. And I'm sure that there are people that sort of smile, and there are probably interviewers that are there, and they will go to his training camp, and they'll look at each other like, boy, is this a joke? But they don't treat it as a joke, as long as he's saying, well, I'll admit, I am sort of heavy, but I'll have the weight down. And yeah, I admit, nobody my age has ever won the title, much less re-won the title. I admit all that. But hey, they've just never seen me. There is something about that, and it's not psychological, is what is always that I strongly suggest. I don't know why I go through all that, since there is no psychology. We've been all through that. I don't know why I keep trying to handle you with kid gloves, like just in case there is no real psychological basis for this. There's not any. But since you can't talk about electricity, well, not like we need to. I just have to talk about it on the basis you think, well, we're talking about electricity, which we wouldn't be, so we might as well talk about boxing. If that kind of relatively speaking, that kind of non-intellectual energy speaks, and you're carrying on conversations with it, you can to yourself, right quick was the point, you can say, with no sarcasm, and we're not saying that you're a psychological misfit to such a degree that you're engaged in self-delusion. That's not it. But you can be sitting there on your couch, and they do a little watching TV, drinking beer, eating your 14th pizza, and they can say something about how people your age, how quickly they're dying because of such and such, and you can say, damn, that's right. Tomorrow I'm going to quit smoking, I'm going to quit drinking or cut down, and I'm going to lose 50 pounds. There's no doubt about it. Hey, honey, tomorrow. Don't cook tomorrow. I'm gonna go on a diet of some kind. I'll tell you what it is, and don't buy more beer. And she might go, But you understand, it is like. I start out the interview of the sportscaster saying, well, it's been a long time since we heard about you. You hadn't been in the ring in 15 years, and you put on a few pounds, if I may say so. Oh, yeah, but no problem. Well, why'd you call this press conference? Because I decided I want the title back, and I'm going into heavy-duty training starting tomorrow. You could be standing there if you're ordinary and go, ha, ha. In the same way that you could stand there and laugh at your partner or somebody in the other room saying, don't buy more beer next weekend, I'm going to quit drinking, and don't get more cigarettes, I'm going to lose weight. You can go, ha, ha. But that's not the end of it. It will get you through the weekend. It will get you through the interview. It moves energy in ordinary life, which is where I started this, because there is a certain kind of, using ordinary descriptions, there's a certain kind of esteem, not just toleration. They don't just interview these guys to say, well, I know I ran the 3-minute mile, and it's been 30 years since I've done anything, but I believe somebody can do a 2-minute mile. I'm being silly. A 2:45 or 2:30. As long as it seems to be that the person, this red circuit sort of guy, is saying, I am going to better my own achievement. But when you get here, it's like the question doesn't exist. That if you had any achievement, right quick, we jump back out in the ordinary world, here's a guy who discovered an element that didn't even exist. It still doesn't. He did something miraculous. He discovered the guy who finally discovered DNA. You know what? He did something astounding, but that's the basis that for his one lifetime, it will carry him. That kind of esteem, that kind of attraction, that kind of fame, if he still noticed it all. It is not on the basis that somebody has to come up and says, well, yeah, we know all that. We know you ran that kind of intellectual mile. But what are you up to now? And him saying, well, I'm getting in training. I've been massaging my brain, and I know I wrote some good books in the past. I know I had some great ideas back when I was considered philosopher deserving of more attention in the more fame back in the playoffs in 1957. And I know some of you think I'm washed up. But I got news for you. I've only begun to think. I'm going to have some thoughts coming up. I'm going into practice. It doesn't exist. It's not just silly. It doesn't exist. Nobody thinks about it because it is not part of the internal arrangement. Because I was putting it to you sort of as a suggestion, hint, and all that. But it is as though everyone had one chance. And it's all the same thing. I'm just saying because some people won't recognize it. But it's as though everybody either had one chance or else they did do their intellectual best. That they did win the heavyweight championship intellectually one time and held it. If you held it for a second, that's it. You either did it or you had the opportunity, which is the same thing. And after that, you're washed up. Because there is no question at the intellectual basis, the way it's arranged about, well, I know that you haven't had any good thoughts, any new insights in 20 years. But hey, let's face it, there's a boxer, the man damn near won the title back at the age of 50. Split decision. If he can do that, there's no way that the intellect goes, you're right. My God, if he can do that, I can have, it doesn't even come into question. It just goes to a point and that's it. Out there, one more time, you're famous if you're famous at all in a non-red circuit sort of situation. If you're famous, then you're going to be famous forever over your past achievement, your past works, paintings, whatever it is, past thoughts. And that's it. So do you see? That kind of fame could be equated also with what do they call it in the city? One's personality, one's apparent self-image. That's your 2-minute mile. That's your book. That's your painting. Well, most people, since most people are not painters, composers, thinkers, at least not enough for them to exercise their art without giving you a headache, they're just ordinary Joes, except for that guy. Yeah. They're just ordinary Joes, and that's their achievement. Well, sure, I'm just old Guido the bricklayer. And nobody says, well, Yeah, I've been watching. I've been around. I've sit here and had beers with you for several years now. Nobody says, "Well, is this the best you're going to do? Are you going to better your own achievement?" Like, well, everybody's achievement outside of so-called famous people. Your achievement is what? Being you. That's it. Well, I lasted. I'm 30 years. My parents didn't kill me. I grew up, and the police hadn't got me. I got through the service without being shot. I got a job, and I own half a car, and I'm Guido. I'm me, and there's no money on my head. I'm not a wanted man, and so that's your 2-minute mile. That's the apex of your achievement. But now notice, does anybody come along and say, "Well, I'm not saying you're bad, but what's in the future for Guido?" Nothing. It's not expected that you say, "Well, I know what you're asking, so now that you took the time to come interview me, that life, you're speaking to life, is giving me some attention. You're right. Sure, I've been Guido, and sure, I've been a great Guido, but you're right, by God, that's not enough. I'm going into training." You hadn't seen anything yet. You realize that's ridiculous. There is no such arrangement in life. And don't say, "Well, wait a minute, that's what psychiatry or feeling groups or cults." No. Those are remedial efforts. Those are like, "Well, sure, I've gone downhill. Is there any way that somebody can just drag me back to a level that at least people look at me and say, 'Well, you're an overweight, overworked, dunderheaded has-been.'" It's not to make you better. I'm exaggerating, of course, but all such things as all forms of psychiatry. Well, and not just the profession, not just the institution, but all ordinary ideas that I'm in some way going to improve myself, which ordinary people listening to this, why would they listen to this? If they did, they'll say, "Wait, what you just said is not true." People do try to improve themselves. One of the big industries in the Western world is all forms of self-improvement. Yeah. But it's not self-improvement. You should be able to see that. I know they say it is, and it serves a purpose. It's convenient to life. But it's not people saying, "I want to be a better me." They say that. I know they do. But you understand, it's not. They've already reached their zenith. They already ran their mile, whether they knew it or not. And all they're wanting to do is just sort of get back to the point that somebody, primarily themselves, will at least interview them and say, "Didn't you used to be Guido?" And you go, "Yeah." That's self-improvement. It's some way by climbing up the wall and torturing yourself and paying large sums of money and listening to boring lectures and giving up all kinds of good vices or whatever, is to get back to the point that somebody will recognize you, primarily yourself, is, "Didn't you used to be that washed up has-been?" That is self-improvement. But that is not an attack on some individual somewhere. That is the nature. When you get here, there's nowhere to go at the ordinary level. A red circuit person, if somebody, those of you who are not old enough, but surely you catch the drift, some of us can remember, it's been some of your lifetimes, that there were people in the medical profession, not only sports, that said no human will ever run a 3-minute mile. It's impossible. They've been trying and clocking it for how many years now? Several hundred at least 100 with reasonable watches, timekeeping implements, that nobody could do it. And suddenly one guy did, and as you know, after one guy did, then a whole bunch of guys did. And then it got to be something else that they can apparently keep pushing. Are you ready? The physical envelope. Isn't that the kind of crap terminology they use? They can apparently keep pushing the boundaries, the goal lines. Players get stronger. They can throw the shot put they can put it even further. For those of you don't shoot the shot put. You don't shot the shoot put. But again, there's a subtleness here. What I want you to see is not just self-help groups. I wasn't picking on some kind of quackery in psychiatry or in cults or how to have a mystical experience through selling real estate. It's not just that. It's not just that. It is the ordinary institutions in the city of academia. The belief that just education will make me a better person. Which, if anybody in the city, I know I'm playing with justice, if an ordinary person wandered around the city after all these thousands of years, that more education, I've tried to get you to see this, surely all of you do, that more education, that certainly will make people a better person. And if they need my help, I can always nudge them and say, remember to point out that there is not one case of a man with a PhD in the United States ever having held up a 7-Eleven store. That's right. So, I mean, there's your proof that if we get all these people out of the housing projects, the homeless people off the street, those that seem to be driven to crime, and we could, of course, I met a guy once that he happened to be in the piano business, but he said that all those people that he thought most crime would stop if everyone, he had retired by then, and he was living a little north of Dade County, but he said that he was convinced that there'd be far less crime, if any, if everyone in this country had a grand piano and a swimming pool. Would you like me to point out the man was not a comedian at all? Well, anyway, the variation of that has always been if we had more education. That is, we would be better people. It's not right or wrong, it's just part of the arrangement. But looked at as far as it being an operational imperative that's going there, if you've got any ability to see, you realize it's not. It's always, everybody says, well, we're going to, over here to Omaha. And you realize that there's no bus going from wherever you are that will ever go to Omaha. Yes. There is no way, under ordinary conditions, that the intellect can better its own achievements. An athlete that did something extraordinary, that held a record, the indoor 220, the indoor shot put, the outdoor javelin throw. Do they have indoor ones? His record may stand, then it may fall, then a whole bunch of young Turks may come along and just sweep. He's almost forgotten. But if the man will show up, that is, if life's arranged in such a way it needs energy to run along wherever his peripheral is now, if he'll kind of show up and say, well, it's been a long time since you guys heard of me, and yet one sportscaster says, wait a minute, I remember you. Well, where you been? We hadn't even thought about you. Well, I know. I got tied up making money, and well, plus I bet you got tied up in drugs. Yeah, I did. Okay. But now I'm straightened out, and I have decided, I've been looking at the kids that's come along, God bless them, I'm sure they worked hard, but I don't see any reason a man my age couldn't get back into it and at least beat my own record. And other people will show up, well, hey, wait a minute, that's so-and-so. The intellect does not even, to put it very crudely, does not even harbor such illusions. Oh! But the convenience is that it says it does, because it says just the opposite of what I was just suggesting, that the intellect, amongst all possibilities of man in the city under ordinary conditions, says that it, in a manner, shall we say, in fact, unique to itself, can continue to achieve. That I'm sure in the city I could take their view. That is, take what life, if I worked at the other side of the street, as ordinary intelligence could say, contrary to everything you just said. Well, stuff it then. Cut the tape. That's the way they feel. Oh, that was they could say, contrary to what you just said. The point comes with what you are calling red circuit-like athletic people. The day comes that there is no chance they can best their own achievements, their past achievements. The day will come no matter how dedicated this man may be, no matter how many vitamins he may take, no matter what a clean life he may live, the man, let's face it, is 82 years old. He weighs 98 pounds. He is not going, even he says he does not plan to beat the top, the indoor shot put record for this year. But folks, the man is not going to pass his own achievement that he did when he was 22 years old and weighed 220 pounds and was in his prime. I'm still talking for ordinary intelligence. They could say, well, that's obvious because everybody's going to deteriorate and die, etc. But an 82-year-old man can still stay active here. His body may be failing him, but the man could go back to school. He could be trying to learn something new. He could be improving himself. It's a wonderful story. It's the same kind of story as come down to the 7-Eleven store. We got everything you need, assuming that you need what we got. That's life. That's life. You don't have to wait for Paul Anka to write you a new version of it. And there's no one in the city, because they're not supposed to, and of course it's not our position either, but there's no one in the city, that is, there's no one inside of your own nervous system naturally. Oh, there were kind of little crumbs around, and you keep waiting for me to try to whip up some kind of cake with it. But there is nothing in anybody's nervous system to say, wait a minute, That is simply not so. Because your whole nervous system is plugged in to the arrangement that says it is so. It's not some kind of battle between me and life, or assuming that you agree with me. I don't know why in the hell you would agree with me, but assuming you agree with it, then it's not you and I against stupidity. Humanity is wired up in such a way. In fact, the more civilized you are, the more that you are engaged in the affairs of the secondary world, the more you're dealing on a fact-basis life, the more it is indisputable. It's not a debate. No sane person would debate this with me. The intellect, maybe not with everybody, and they'd say, well, some people have brain damage, some people have dangerous. No. But they would say, all of that notwithstanding, the one place in humanity that continues to grow is the intellect. Now, of course, they can come up with anecdotal evidence that here's a guy who went back to school after he was 75 and finished and got himself a bachelor's degree. And he says he feels better. He sees that if he had a sex life, it would have been improved by now. And yet, he's dying slowly of emphysema, perhaps. And so they could say there's no doubt. Well, you can forget the thing. It's not really tied to that. But again, it just seems to be that kind of balanced truth. They can say a man's person, a body will deteriorate. A man who was Mr. Universe 15 years ago now looks like, look at him, that's him sitting on those two bar stools. That's the way it goes. But there's no reason a man's intellect cannot stay not only healthy, but can improve, can continue to grow. There is no way to say no. You certainly can't prove it no, because it's not really no. Except for those who can see, it's not so. And I was, as always, trying to get you to consider, to start with, right there in life, right on your own little 21-inch black and white Dumont, right in front of you constantly are being these interviews that nobody even notices. It goes in a certain way, is how I started this setup, with those, relatively speaking, of a less oriented, fact-based existence. Athletes, physical activity. And part of the fame, if they're going to have any, which is a form of active energy transfer. You know, fame is, that's not the point of any of this, but you understand, fame is an active energy transfer that somebody comes up and says, aren't you so-and-so? That's, if it's just somebody in the street, that if you did have one gigantic, interesting play in high school, it is a kind of out-of-ordinary energy transfer. If now 20 years later you're in a supermarket and somebody comes up and says, aren't you so-and-so? You go, well, yeah, why? Did you know, I don't know why, it just struck me, I was at that game, and you might know then, and they say, I keep up with professional football in college, but high school football, when it's played well, there's nothing like it, and by God, I still remember that play you did. And they shake your hand. And here it is, you and them, you're both 45 years old, and both of you are overweight. It is a kind of energy transfer that's not normally available in exchange. It becomes even more so when it seems to have an institutional basis, that is, a reporter. Somebody from an institution, somebody that the city recognizes. You know, nobody cares the reporter may have an IQ of asphalt. But the reporter comes up, he's got a cameraman, he's got a microphone, got a suit and tie, got a pencil, and he says, I'm from channel so-and-so, and just for that to happen, if you'd never done anything famous in your life, you already feel more energy that, ooh, they're going to ask me something. But if they come up and say, we're doing a retrospect on what happens to famous high school athletes. And then you go, oh. And they go, and you say, you remember my play? And the guy goes, well, no, I wasn't even born then. And you go, but he says, we were checking back, and they said that you were at one time one of the outstanding football quarterbacks in this state. It is a form, we're not making fun of fame. That's not even the point. You understand? It is a particular kind, well, don't let me mislead you. It is not a subspecies or a unique kind of energy, but it is an increase in energy. It's part of what drives people, the addiction of fame. In case you never thought about it, it is energy. Forget all that psychological stuff. But it's to be able to walk into a room or up on a stage or out in a stadium, and people go, ah! It's energy. It's not normally available. And there's no sense picking on or saying, well, it's illusionary, you can say anything you want to. It is a special form of energy. Back to where I was trying to get you to see, it is a special form of energy, and it applies itself and works into an active dance without any problem when you're down to a level below the neck in the nervous system. That is, physical activity being the easy one. that I will better my own past achievements. And it will get you through the weekend. It will make people interview you. It will make you listen to yourself. Yeah, all right, I'll quit smoking and lose weight starting Monday. You'll listen to it. It's like you were the announcer and you go, are you really? I mean, you're sitting here now. You used to be you were svelte. I don't think you'd call a football player svelte. Of course, maybe nowadays you can, based upon the kind of, I don't go into it. And it's like you're interviewing yourself, whether you're going to take your own internal conversations, decisions, dreams, hopes, aspirations seriously. And it's like you interview yourself. Well, here you are, you're sitting, burp, drinking beer, you're overweight, you're probably killing yourself. And at one time, you could have been somebody. You could have entered Mr. Snellville in 1952. You know, you weren't in bad shape, or you might have made it. If you'd had the money to go to college, you might have made it to the pros. You're right, this is pitiful. I'm going to lose weight. It's like you saying, I'm going to better my past achievements, and you being also the interviewer, you will take it seriously. Like, well, you're still somebody. But intellectually, there is no comparable parallel. And yet, one more time, I'll speak for ordinary life. If they heard this, they'd say, that's not true. They'd have to say, well, forget some individual circumstance, because you would be using some kind of anecdotal anomaly of somebody whose brain is a little messed up. But they would want to say, institutionally speaking, on a broad range, they would say to me, what you're saying is not true, because with all, it is the intellect that can grow. It is the intellect that can look to the future. It is the intellect that can continue to increase and outdo itself. And that's true. That is what progress is. But it does not occur in one person's lifetime. That is the trick. That is what drives humanity, again, is that the individual believes, I can do it. So we can say, we're running out. Can you hear? I was trying to wrap it up to punchline. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Everybody's heard that. All right, forget the physical part. Say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But then ordinary humanity would say, wait a minute, yes you can, and they would anecdotally prove it. And even if they didn't have the individual scenarios, it is already wired in that they would say, you can. But here's what they're saying, and it's a fact. You can teach kennels new tricks. But you can't teach that dog a new trick. In an individual, an ordinary individual's lifetime, he is never going to best his own intellectual achievement. But notice the subtle beauty of it is then every individual stands up and goes, arf, arf. I'm sorry. They stand up and they would say to somebody like me, what I was saying, they would say, that is just totally incorrect, because humanity grows not by physical acts, as interesting as sports may be. It grows by new ideas and men bettering their own past thoughts and dreams and aspirations and artistic achievements. Right. Exactly right. Don't you see? But not the individual. The race of canines continues to better themselves, and they do learn new and new tricks. But one dog in one lifetime, the truism, the proverb prevails. You cannot teach an old dog new tricks. You can teach dogdom a new trick. Life expands through man in this, but it does not expand in one man. That's what this stuff's about, because it doesn't happen in one lifetime naturally. In saying that, I will bid adieu to all of you old bow wows.